Hello and welcome to Popular Antiquarian, the podcast about a middle-aged man exploring the strange and forgotten corners of pop culture. That middle-aged man is me, Hieronymus J. Doom, and this is the second instalment of our deep dive into Mystic Knights of Tir Na Nog, the island-adjacent fantasy action series from the makers of Power Rangers. This episode is being recorded in the Doom Industries mobile studio while I'm dog-sitting for my brother. She is a very good dog indeed, but that does mean we'll be operating with a slightly reduced sound quality for a while. Apologies for that. Before we get started, I also need to thank a couple of new patrons. These are kind souls who have gone to patreon.com/HJDoom and pledged as little as a single English pound to support my nonsense and keep this show on the air and ad-free. Roger and Liz, you have my eternal gratitude. All patrons receive a bevy of silly gaming materials as a thank you, and that parcel of stuff now includes a brand new Twine game based on the life and crimes of Britain's least loved cultural icon, Mr. Blobby. Mr. Blobby and the Propaganda of the Deed is out now and is a 560-section text adventure featuring all manner of comedic and deeply libelous action. People seem to be really enjoying it, and it is yours for a single £1 or local equivalent. When we left off last time, the core cast of Mystic Knights had been assembled for a dangerous quest to find the magical land of Tir Na Nog. Rowan, the boring one, Deirdre, the serious one, Angus, the morally ambiguous one, and Ivar, the other serious one, had fallen into a magical shaft that seemed to lead to the land they were seeking, to fulfill a reasonably ancient prophecy based on Rowan having a portentous birthmark that looks like a half-finished tattoo. Meanwhile, the villainous Queen Maeve's forces, supported by a CGI ogre, press their attack on the Kingdom of Kells, which is ruled over by a pair of middle-aged character actors. We open with the four heroes landing in Tir Na Nog, which looks like an absolute shithole, honestly. It's a rudimentary cave set with big styrofoam-looking rocks everywhere and very little light. It is to Narnia as Bedford Bus Station is to the Orient Express. That doesn't stop our quartet from having to act looking very impressed at it all, but the overall vibe is like going to someone's house and them suddenly showing you their extensive collection of Nazi memorabilia. You're going to try and make out you're enthralled, but only until you can find some excuse to leave and then call the police. We get a little bit of business with Rowan and Angus squabbling over Deirdre's affections, which she completely and sensibly ignores. Their obsession with Deirdre doesn't make a great deal of sense given her obvious contempt for both of them, but they either get off on that or, more plausibly, have never met another woman in their lives. As far as I can tell, Deirdre is the only woman in the entire land of Kells, or at least the only woman with a speaking part. I think I saw some ladies in a crowd scene, but I wouldn't swear to it. This is a common problem with boy-coded media and raises all kinds of salacious questions about the breeding arrangements in the kingdom. Ivar decides to head off on his own, but runs into some unseen danger and immediately returns to claim that he should accompany the main group in case they have need of his skills. This shows a little more of his character. He's someone who takes himself very seriously and doesn't easily admit to making mistakes. He'd be right at home on Twitter, were he not black. Next, we are introduced to the inhabitants of Tir Na Nog, the Little People, and they are basically a hate crime against Irish folklore and struggling actors, being a series of diminutive humanoids with helium voices who are dressed like Smurfs. Smurfs who are on an FBI watch list. They titter constantly and gratingly, and there's a strong suggestion that the reason Tir Na Nog looks like such a dump is that the locals spend their whole lives ripped to the tits on nitrous oxide. You definitely don't get the impression of a functioning economy or a rich artistic culture. There's been a lot of great art made on drugs, but I'm not aware of any of it that was made on nitrous oxide. Angus spots a big jar of money and lunges straight for it with the determination of someone who is the only member of the core cast who isn't looking to inherit either a kingdom or a sinecure role as the court druid. The heroes are caught in a net immediately and taken by the cackling little folk to meet the king of Tir Na Nog, who has one of those long beards with no moustache that should be grounds for committal to an asylum for white men who aren't from the Amish community. I guess, being the king, no one wants to tell him he looks like a fool. Our heroes beg for aid, and after threatening to turn them into Spriggans, the king allows them to take a test which will determine whether they are worthy to find the Knight Draganta who can theoretically save the kingdom. The first part of the test turns out to be the old crushing walls routine straight out of the first Star Wars movie. Rowan, thinking quickly, uses his sword as a brace to arrest the progress of the walls for long enough for his companions to escape. But oh no, Ivar has got his sleeve caught and can't manage to extricate himself. He tells the others to save themselves. Risking death, Rowan removes his sword and uses it to cut Ivar free. They dart out of the trap at the last possible second, and Ivar, impressed by Rowan's self-sacrifice, offers his support in the quest by way of a quid pro quo. Remember that his main goal in life is to find the cup that was half-inched by person or persons unknown, which is almost certainly the cup that Queen Maeve uses to summon her weirdly sexually ambiguous fairy friend. We haven't checked in on Kells for a while, and this gives us a chance to bring in yet another supporting character in the form of a sprite named Aideen, portrayed by Kelly Campbell. She's a winged fairy, and thankfully the producers have made the choice to give her a fractionally less grating voice than the rest of the little people of Tir Na Nog. She's kind of a Tinkerbell figure, only with all the charm extracted. She agrees to go and take a peek at events in the Kingdom of Kells, where things don't seem to be going particularly well. Maeve's forces are advancing on all fronts with the aid of their CGI ogre. She seems to be feeling pretty good about her chances, which gives the actor, Charlotte Bradley, a chance to show off her impressive range of smug expressions. The ogre still doesn't look very good in motion, but I'm honestly impressed with how hard they're trying to convey it as a threat. Since the last episode, it's picked up the habit of coughing up fire like a cat with a hairball, and the various extras are doing their level best to act stricken with panic without falling over and muddying their costumes. Part 2 of the test sees Angus get a chance to shine. It makes very little sense. He gets separated from the main group by a trail of treasure and then happens across another large jar of gold coins and gets accosted by one of the many magical gnomes, who offers him all the treasure in the world if he'll help get the other 3 killed in the Tomb of Pillars. The Tomb of Pillars is a room with a deep chasm which can only be crossed by walking on a series of colour-coded pillars. Half of them are red, half of them are blue. Tell your friends to step on the red pillars, which will kill them, and all this treasure will be yours, promises the murder gnome in a high-pitched Irish accent I'm not going to attempt to copy. We cut back to the Tomb of Pillars, where Rowan, Deirdre and Ivar are debating where to step, and also vaguely wondering what happened to Angus, but only vaguely. Just as Rowan is about to step on a blue pillar, Angus rocks up and tells him that they should only step on the red pillar, and a fairy told him so. Oh no, is he going to get them all killed? Then, in a twist, Angus says he will go first to check that it's safe. He steps gingerly on the first pillar, and it supports his weight. It turns out that the fairy was a liar, and Angus spotted the fact, which is a decent bit of folklore-style trickery. If Angus had tried to kill them, they would have survived, and if he tried to keep them alive, they would have died, but he realised that a fairy offering money for murder is probably not to be trusted, much like a politician offering anything. Volunteering to go first to test the theory is a good touch, since it puts the consequences of his decision squarely on his own head. What makes less sense is how the plan, as pitched by the gnome, was supposed to work. Sure, he could have got Rowan to step on the death pillar and thus send him tumbling into the void, but what about Ivar and Deirdre? How was he supposed to get them into the chasm? I can't imagine they'll be leaping at the chance to step on the same colour pillars that Rowan stood on, what with one thing and another. I suppose he could have suggested that they all step onto a pillar at the same time, but good luck trying to make that sound like a sensible plan. It doesn't matter, because with some truly excellent wobbling acting, all 4 of them manage to make it across to the other side of the tomb and head to the next challenge, which turns out to be sinking in some quicksand and being dumped back in the Fairy King's throne room. He then announces that they have failed the test and will be turned into Spriggans as the penalty for failing. He waves a wand and glowing green mist envelops them. Then Deirdre steps forward and volunteers to be turned into a Spriggan if the other 3 will be allowed to continue their quest. This, it turns out, was the last test. The other 3 all showed heroic traits through the test, and now so has Deirdre. She volunteered to take the place of her friends. Rowan showed bravery by going back for his comrade. Ivar showed self-sacrifice by choosing to forego his quest for his missing cup to help the people of Kells after Rowan saved his life, and Angus, because he is working class, had to show both intelligence and honesty in order to prove himself. One thing that explaining the story doesn't really convey is just how compressed this action is. The episodes are barely more than 20 minutes long, and there's still a bunch of stuff that they need to get through, so the whole business with the trial has taken about 7 actual minutes of screen time. Now, this isn't a criticism at all. I think one of the things that drew me to covering Mystic Knights of Tir Na Nog is an increasing fascination with media that straddles both short-form and long-form methods of storytelling. I'm a big comics guy, although not much of a mainstream Marvel or DC fan, and I really like how comics force writers to get right to the heart of a story in a way that rarely allows for any flabbiness in the telling. There's something really engaging about the sheer breakneck speed with which Mystic Knights of Tir Na Nog rattles through the plot in these early episodes. It's something that feels very much out of step with modern sensibilities, where the rise of streaming media and box set culture has led to a tendency for plots to get stretched and elongated into baggy self-indulgence. Because modern TV doesn't feel the same need to offer self-contained episodes, plot lines that would once have been compressed into an hour of television can now easily play out over multiple episodes. That was something that felt really exciting in the first few seasons of Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead, for example, but like all good things, it has a dark side as well. Cliffhangers that might once have been the bridge between acts 2 and 3 of an episode now get shunted to the end of an episode, and major plot points are doled out with increasing miserliness as showrunners are expected to aim for 7 long seasons right from episode 1. It's not something that's strictly a new problem. I remember watching a bunch of Dragon Ball Z a few years back, and boy howdy does that show love its filler. It's refreshing to watch something from an era where that simply isn't a concern. A story where the heroes undergo a trial to prove their worthiness can easily fill an hour of TV. I can think of several episodes of Buffy and Angel which more or less do exactly that, but here it's getting 7 minutes because they've got stuff to do. And I think that's actually kind of awesome. I'm assuming that as we get deeper into the series, a different problem will rear its head, which is that shows like this often trade very heavily on formula, with many episodes following a strict narrative template. That's certainly going to be a challenge to write about if it happens in the way I expect, but for now I get the unbridled joy of episodes where there's just a cornucopia of stuff to talk about. Having passed the King's tests, he now rewards them with the second half of the Scroll of Destiny, which turns out to be not a simple map of where to find the Great Warrior Juganta. That quest must continue, but for now there are other challenges that must be faced. They need to find their armour, aka the costumes that will make them look like the toy line, but before they can do even that, there is the small matter of a rampaging ogre and the army of Temra, which is closing in on the castle of Kells. To help them with this, the king has ordered his smiths to make magical weapons for the quartet of heroes. A sword for Rowan, which wields the power of fire, a weird crossbow-looking thing for Deirdre, which has the power of air, a trident for Ivar, which has the power of water, and the world's most awkward-looking ball and chain for Angus, which has the power of earth. They all look extremely stupid and plastic, and I love them all, especially Angus's ball and chain, which looks like it was made by someone who has never seen a ball of chain and wasn't really paying attention when it was described to them. It kind of looks more like an oversized novelty keyring than a weapon. I'm a sucker for a genuinely wildly impractical weapon, and the best way to use this weapon in real life would be to show it to your enemy and hope they laugh themselves to death. We now cut to the epic battle for Kells Castle. This is an unmitigated delight. Every single shot is brilliantly conceived and gloriously incompetently executed. Taken in conception, it's enormously ambitious for a 20-minute episode of a kids' TV show, and has a distinct kinetic charm in the framing that the actual action is doing its best to ruin. You've got so many Siege classics in this short sequence. You get a battering ram, defenders chucking what looks like cauldrons of piss down on the attackers, siege ladders, grappling hooks, and even a working trebuchet. Not a trebuchet that works well, I hasten to add. It's quite big and capable of launching a fake rock anything up to several feet, which provides a joyously pathetic moment in the battle. Not to mention a rampaging ogre that shows its face from time to time. We get to see King Conovar and his warriors desperately defending the walls from this unrelenting assault, all while contriving not to show anyone actually getting seriously hurt. Battles in kids' media are always amazing in the sense that they are absolutely not allowed to show more than a minimum of violence. I vividly remember the lengths He-Man went to in order to avoid any of the characters coming to actual harm. Things had loosened up a bit by the late 90s, but there's still no way you're going to be showing anyone getting stabbed in the guts on a Saturday morning adventure serial. There's a lot of dodges that TV shows have used to try and show a little bit more action. I remember Transformers could show its characters getting shot with lasers on the basis that they were machines and could be easily repaired, and similarly, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles reimagined the Foot Clan as disposable robots who could be smashed with impunity. Mystic Knights of Tir Na Nog has decided that they're okay throwing the odd punch or seeing people get knocked off the battlements, so long as it's clear they've come to no lasting harm. TV seems to have decided at some point that a punch is broadly consequence-free, but of course you can do someone a proper mischief with a closed fist. Back when I worked in mental health, I supported a young lad who was left with life-altering brain injuries by a single punch, and people have been known to die from a single blow to the head. It is, however, a very useful fiction for television, and I'm glad of it, otherwise we'd be watching these fights settled by a thumb war. I don't think I've ever seen a sequence in TV that looked so simultaneously ambitious and underwhelming. It puts me in mind of The Asylum at their most asylum, though, to be fair to Mystic Knights of Tir Na Nog, this looks more impressive than most comparable sequences in an Asylum movie, thanks to the presence of a fair number of extras, an actual castle, and the sort of working trebuchet they built. Things are looking very bleak for the forces of the king as soldiers of Temra swarm up the walls and the ogre approaches. This is inevitably the point at which our heroes make their appearance, just in time to save the day. We get to see their magic weapons in action. Deirdre's crossbow thing knocks over a whole troop of Temra soldiers with a gust of magical wind. Ivar's trident does the same thing with a blast of lightning. Hopefully none of those Temra soldiers had a pre-existing heart condition. Rowan's sword sends a burst of magical fire searing onto a siege ladder, forcing the Temra soldiers to jump for safety. Again, it's the ball and chain of Angus that's the real star, in that it's incredibly stupid and hard to wield. He sort of swings it awkwardly round and round his head in a way that demonstrates the handle isn't very good for doing that. It sort of fends off some soldiers in a very non-specific way. Then he swings it even faster and lets go and launches the entire thing towards the trebuchet, and it somehow turns into a big rock that smashes the war machine to pieces, but also does disarm Angus in the process. I really am looking forward to them finding non-lethal ways for him to fight enemies while chucking rocks the size of a family car. It's going to be a challenge. With the main horde seen off by the 4 teenagers with plastic weapons, there remains only the small matter of the ogre. It gets to fire precisely one fireball before the heroes surround it, and all attack it with their magical weapons simultaneously. Apparently, Angus doesn't need to let go of his ball and chain to make it fire rocks this time, which raises the possibility that he just got overexcited earlier and let go by mistake, which would be awesome if true. The ogre doesn't put up much of a fight and promptly dissolves in a distinctly underwhelming fashion. Maeve retreats with her general, swearing this is not the end, and everything gets wrapped up nicely with King Conovar officially dubbing them the Mystic Knights of Tir Na Nog, who will continue the quest to find Draganta and save the kingdom. Honestly, it's a really enjoyable 20 minutes of television, much more fun than the first episode, with plenty of action and character moments along the way. Obviously, the little people are terrible, but they aren't in it that much, and what we get is a wonderfully frenetic bit of nonsense that effortlessly marries the legitimately quite good with the enjoyably terrible. The battle scene alone makes it worthwhile, and I very much enjoyed seeing a bit more depth from the characters. Rowan is still boring, Deirdre is still a bit of a killjoy, but Angus and Ivar get better shrift from the script than in episode 1. Ivar is quite pompous, but it's the fun kind of pompous where he takes himself too seriously and it creates a good comic effect. Angus has stopped singing folk songs, which is a positive, and comes across as much less of a psychopath than in the first episode. He seems to be pitched as the one who gets the short end of the stick, and he's definitely grown on me. Game might recognise game, but so too does Loser. With that episode done, I'm super pumped for the next episode. How long can I keep up this enthusiasm? Your guess is as good as mine. If I run according to form, it'll be for longer than I expect, but then I'll start to feel like I'm going insane. Maybe at some point I'll start reviewing the episodes in batches, but for now I feel like there's a surprising amount of meat in each episode. I should also say that the podcast schedule may get a little strange. As I'm away from home at the moment, in theory I have nothing better to do than walk the dog and write podcasts. So maybe there'll be another episode up this week, or maybe I'll record the episode and hold it back for later, or maybe my mental health will take a tumble, or I'll become so dangerously obsessed with Mystic Knights of Tir Na Nog I can't think about anything else. Who can say, apart from other, better podcasts with a more structured release schedule. If you want to get in touch with me, you can do so by emailing me at hjdoom@retrofun, or one word, @gmail.com, or by following me on Blue Sky at hjdoom. If you're enjoying this podcast, why not tell a friend? If you're not, why not tell an enemy? This has been a production of Doom Industries. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, and I'll see you soon.